When I was 13, my parents left me at my grandmother's house and never looked back. They called me a freak because of my medical issues and decided I was too much to handle. Now, years later, they are begging me for a share of my inheritance to help my brother get out of trouble. To give you some context, I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was very young. It was tough, and my parents were not exactly equipped to handle it. Instead of stepping up, they treated me like I was some kind of contagious problem they could not deal with. I was about 6 years old when I first noticed the difference in how they treated me compared to my older brother, Michael. Michael was 3 years older than me and seemed to get all their love and attention. They thought he was perfect, and I was just a burden they had to tolerate. As if epilepsy was not enough, by the time I was 8, I was also diagnosed with dyslexia and severe ADHD. Needless to say, life got even harder for everyone, but instead of supporting me, my parents grew more distant and frustrated. They had chosen to have children, but they acted like they never expected one of them to have challenges. Since Michael turned out perfectly fine, they just assumed I would be the same. When I was not, they made me feel like I was a mistake they had no choice but to deal with. They never tried to hide their feelings. It was like they were merely tolerating my existence. My childhood was not fun or normal, not because of my medical issues, but because of the way they treated me. Honestly, the illnesses were only a small part of my struggles. The real pain came from how they responded to me. They made me feel like I did not belong, like I was an outsider in my own family. I always felt like an unwanted weight dragging them down. Every time I walked into a room, they would go silent, as if I had sucked all the energy out of the space. They walked on eggshells around me, and I could tell they wished I was not there. This started when I was still a little kid, so you can imagine how much worse it got as I grew older. My mental health was in shambles by the time I hit my teenage years, and I started acting out. I was angry at how they treated me, angry at how they loved Michael more than me, and angry at the world. I stopped trying in school and purposely failed my classes. I was rude, defiant, and determined to push everyone away. Even my friends could not stand to be around me, but I did not care. Deep down, I was desperate for my parents' attention, even if it was negative. But they did not care. Every time the school called them because I had broken a rule or caused trouble, they would sigh in disappointment but never really do anything about it. They would not even scold me. It was like they were too tired to bother. At home, I tried to get their attention by throwing tantrums, but they ignored me. Sometimes, they would say things like, "He's having another fit," and then roll their eyes as if I was being dramatic. When I was 13, I crossed a line. I brought cigarettes to school and started smoking one right in the middle of class. When my teacher told me to stop and ordered me out of the room, I flipped him off. That was the final straw. I was expelled, and for the first time, my parents were furious. They screamed at me like never before, calling me names and saying things I will never forget. They told me they regretted ever having me. They said if they had known I would turn out this way, they would have terminated the pregnancy. Hearing those words was like a knife to the heart. They said I was a burden and that their lives were better before I came along. I was grounded for a week, but it was worse than that. They locked me in my room. I could only come out for bathroom breaks, and they brought my meals to the door. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. After that week, they made it clear they wanted me out of their lives for good. One day, they told me to pack up my things. My mother and Michael gathered my stuff while I sat in the car, and then we drove off. It was not long before I realized we were heading to my grandmother's house. At first, I thought maybe they were sending me there temporarily, but when we arrived, the truth hit me: they were leaving me there for good. When we pulled up to my grandmother's house, I thought maybe my parents were going to let me stay there for a couple of weeks, just long enough to get my act together. My grandma, Ellen, was strict, but she always had a soft spot for me. She treated me far better than my parents ever did, and I figured this was just some kind of punishment to help me straighten up. But when we arrived, it became clear this was not a temporary arrangement. My parents were leaving me there for good, expecting her to raise me because they were done with me. That week of silence in my room? It was not just about grounding me, it was about giving my parents time to convince Grandma Ellen to take me in. As soon as we arrived, they unloaded all my belongings onto her porch. My mom turned to me and said, "This is your new home now. We do not want any contact with you ever again, especially not after what you have done. They accused me of trying to ruin their reputation and told me I had crossed the line. I could not believe what I was hearing. At the door, I begged them not to do this. I still wanted to have a relationship with them, no matter how badly they had treated me. I was only 13, and I was desperate for a place where I belonged. But they had made up their minds. Right there, in front of Grandma Ellen, they said they were done with me. They did not even want to hear about me anymore. Then, they used the words that cut the deepest. They said they could not handle having a freak like me in their family and wanted to focus on my normal brother, Michael. Hearing those words from my parents hurt more than anything the bullies at school ever said to me. When kids at school called me names, I could brush it off. But when it came from my own parents, it was unbearable. That was the moment I realized they were not just bad parents, they were the worst bullies I had ever known. In hindsight, maybe they were doing me a favor by leaving me with Grandma Ellen because they never truly loved me. Even if I had been the perfect child, I doubt it would have made a difference. To them, Michael was the only child that mattered. I stopped begging and accepted my new reality. If this was how things were going to be, I would make the most of it. I decided then and there that I was going to turn things around not just for myself, but for my grandma. I knew she deserved better than the mess I had been, and so did I. After my parents left, Grandma Ellen and I sat down to have an honest conversation. She told me that while she loved me, she had not been ready to take me in. She admitted she had her doubts because of everything my father had told her about my behavior. At her age, she was already in her 60s, she worried she might not be able to handle a troubled teenager like me. She understood that I needed help but was unsure if she could provide the environment I needed to grow. She explained that she had hesitated because she was a widow with limited resources, and adopting me felt like a huge responsibility. But when she learned that my parents had locked me in my room for an entire week, she realized they were not fit to raise me. She apologized for not stepping in sooner and said she wanted to give me a fresh start. She promised to do right by me, unlike my parents. "This is a chance for both of us," she said. "Let us make the most of it." Hearing those words, I felt a glimmer of hope. I apologized for the way I had acted in the past and told her I forgave her for not stepping in sooner. We agreed to leave the past behind us and work together to build a better future. From that moment on, I was determined to prove I was worth the effort she was making for me. I owe everything to my grandmother. I truly do not think I would have become the person I am today if she had not taken me in. She gave me the second chance I so desperately needed, and for that, I will always be grateful. From the moment I moved in with Grandma Ellen, everything started to change for the better. With her support and guidance, I turned my life around completely. She made it clear that she believed in me, and I decided to prove her right. She worked hard to create an environment where I could thrive. She hired tutors who specialized in working with kids like me, made sure I was enrolled in a private school, and spoke with the staff so they understood my unique needs. Unlike my parents, she did not use my challenges as an excuse to hold me back. Instead, she saw them as a reason to provide me with the help I needed to succeed. That effort paid off. I managed to graduate with solid grades and even got accepted into college. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was accomplishing something, and I had Grandma Ellen to thank for that. My parents continued to visit Grandma occasionally, but they never tried to see me. I made it a point to avoid them whenever they came by. I would leave the house before they arrived and only come back after I was sure they had left. They never seemed to care about this arrangement, and honestly, neither did I. This went on for a couple of years until one day, Grandma had enough. She confronted them during one of their visits. She told them they were terrible parents for not even attempting to reach out to me, especially now that I was doing better. She pointed out that they had every reason to apologize for the way they had treated me and try to rebuild our relationship, but they refused. Instead, they doubled down, insisting they had done nothing wrong. They called me a freak and a rotten apple once again, and that was the last straw for Grandma Ellen. She told them never to come back, and true to their nature, they stuck to their pride and stayed away. It was clear they could not handle the truth about their shortcomings as parents, and they were too egotistical to admit they had failed me. For nearly 10 years, there was no contact between us. Grandma and I pretended they did not exist, and I focused on building a life for myself. During those years, I achieved so much. I graduated college, started my career, and hit milestones I never thought were possible. My parents never reached out to congratulate me or check in, even though they could have easily contacted me through social media. They chose not to, and honestly, I was fine with that. It was not until a few months ago, after Grandma Ellen passed away, that I finally heard from them again. Losing her was devastating. She was my rock, my support system, and the only family member who truly cared about me. Even though I had moved out and was living on my own, her presence in my life remained strong. Coping with her loss was already hard enough, and then my parents showed up. Not even 6 months after her passing, they came to my door demanding that I share my inheritance. Apparently, my perfect and healthy brother, Michael, had not turned out the way they expected. He had gotten himself into trouble, and now they needed my help to clean up his mess. They started off with small talk and empty condolences, but it did not take long for them to get to the real reason they were there. They told me that Michael had developed a drug habit while he was in college, and now it had spiraled out of control. From what I gathered, he was in serious trouble and needed help. They wanted me to give them money from my inheritance so they could pay for an expensive residential rehab program. I asked why he could not just attend a more affordable program that they could cover, but they claimed they had already tried that and it had not worked. According to them, only the best rehab facility would do, and those cost a lot. I do not know much about rehab costs, and frankly, I did not care to find out. What I did know was that Grandma Ellen had left me a solid inheritance, and I had no intention of giving it up without conditions. I told them I was willing to help, but only on one condition: they would have to publicly acknowledge everything they had done to me and to Grandma. They needed to admit the horrible way they treated me, the awful things they said, and the way they abandoned me. I also wanted them to explain why they now needed my help and make it clear they were coming to me out of desperation. For years, Grandma had insisted we keep our family issues private to avoid drama. But now that they were asking for a piece of her money after everything they had done, I felt it was only fair to expose the truth. I did not feel guilty for asking this of them. They had wronged me in so many ways, and if they wanted my help, they needed to take responsibility for their actions. Their faces dropped when I told them my terms. They tried to argue, saying I was being selfish and unreasonable. I stood firm and told them it was non-negotiable. I had no problem helping Michael, but only if they owned up to the truth. They treated me terribly and disrespected Grandma, and they needed to acknowledge that before I could move forward. They left after a lot of crying and accusations, but I did not budge. I told them they could take it or leave it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I was not going to let them manipulate me again. This money we were discussing came directly from my grandmother. If my parents wanted her money, they had to acknowledge the truth about what they had done. It was as simple as that. I could not understand why they were so resistant, but when I told them this, their reactions made it clear. They called me heartless and emotionless, saying they never expected such cruelty from me. I responded calmly, "You should not have expected anything from me at all, considering we have not spoken in over 10 years. I stood my ground. If they wanted my help, they needed to accept and publicly acknowledge their mistakes. That was non-negotiable. After that, they left, but not without a lot of crying and accusations. I did not budge. Now, they are trying to guilt-trip me, insisting that my brother is in dire need of help and I am his only chance. What they fail to see is that I am not their savior. My grandmother and I only had each other. For all those years, they never cared enough to check on us, let alone help. Even when my grandmother passed away, they would not have known if I had not informed my relatives. That is how they learned about the funeral. So why should I feel obligated to help people who have ignored and dismissed me for over a decade? I still wonder if I am wrong for refusing financial help unless they publicly acknowledge their wrongdoings. But deep down, I know I am justified. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. I am doing just fine. It has been hard dealing with the loss of my grandmother, but she lived a full life and passed away with no regrets. I am grateful for the time I had with her, and I know she is in a better place. Thank you for the concern and kind words. As for my parents, they are still pestering me online, but I have held my ground. I told them that unless they do as I said, they can forget about receiving any money. My grandmother left everything to me in her will, and I know they are aware of it since the lawyer sent out an email. At this point, all they can do is sit and wallow in their regret. It has been a week since I last spoke to them, and since their emotional pleas have not worked, they have resorted to sending me pictures of my brother. He looks rough, pathetic, even. They keep sending these photos, urging me to help him because he is in terrible condition. To that, I have only one thing to say: where were they when I needed help? They abandoned me, and I was lucky that my grandmother stepped in to save me. Otherwise, I do not know where I would have ended up. They did not care about me, and while I feel for my brother, I cannot help unless they own up to their actions. The public apology is not about shaming them, it is about accountability. Their pride drove all their decisions in the past, and now they need to set it aside if they truly want to help the son they claim to love. For me, it is a test to see what comes first for them, their pride or their son. Update 2. 10 days have passed since I last spoke to my parents. Eventually, I stopped responding to their messages. Today, they showed up at my place again, this time with my brother in tow. It was shocking and, frankly, upsetting to see them try to manipulate me like this. I met them at the door and told them this behavior was unacceptable. I explained that this stunt was only making things worse for them. Using my brother as some kind of pawn was not only dehumanizing to him but also deeply disrespectful to me. I told them to leave, but they refused. They said they would not go until I promised to help. I stood firm and told them I would make no such promise. I even warned them that if they continued to harass me, I would call the police. That seemed to scare them, and they finally left, but not before my father managed to throw one last insult. He called my grandmother and me the most selfish people on the planet. The irony of that statement coming from him, after they abandoned me at her doorstep, was almost laughable. The truth is, they could not handle me because I was not the perfect son they had envisioned. But if my grandmother and I are selfish, there are not even words to describe what they are. Update 3. Hi, everyone. I am sorry for the delay in updating, I got caught up with work. A lot has happened in the 2 months since my last post. The biggest change is that I have officially blocked my parents. They no longer have any way to contact me, and I have moved into a new apartment in a different neighborhood. I also made it very clear to all my relatives that they are not to share my address with anyone, especially my parents. The last time they found me was because someone decided they had the right to know where I lived. That will not happen again. This time, I took every precaution to make sure they cannot find me. After my father called me selfish during our last interaction, I decided I was done with them for good. They showed me time and time again that their pride would always come first, even above the son they claimed to love. I understand they never cared about me because of my ADHD, dyslexia, and other challenges. But Michael was their golden child, the one they always put on a pedestal. The fact that they could not even set their egos aside for him is proof of their true priorities. All they had to do was admit they made mistakes. Most of our family already knows there was bad blood between us, so this was not some earth-shattering revelation. But they refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. To them, they are perfect, and I am the problem. Well, they can keep believing that if it makes them feel better. I will hold on to my inheritance, and they can hold on to their pride. That seems fair enough to me.